Happy Friday, everyone. Just go ahead and give it a second here. I want to make sure that we are actually live. Oh, there we go. We got a comment. Hi, Dan. I like your videos very much. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me here today. Greg is here. Thank you, Greg. Just let me know out there if I sound okay, if the video looks good. One thing I've had a problem with in the past is like voice audio not syncing up, like some weird issue there. So I'm trying to see if that is okay as well. So let me just check this. Sound good, sync good. Oh, that's good to know. Like I said, I've had problems with that. I'm going to pipe in a little background music just while I finish something up here. Let me know if you hear that. So like I said, I have two real things I want to accomplish today. One, get back into the world of streaming. I've done some of that, but it's been a while, so I want to get back to this. Using software, making sure everything's working correctly, making sure the video looks good, making sure the audio is good. That's my main concern today. The second is, anytime I live stream, I do want to interact with everybody and hopefully teach something. So today we're going to be talking about building REST APIs in Spring Boot. So that is the plan there. We're going to hopefully learn something today. Even if you've built REST APIs in Spring Boot before, this might be a good opportunity to pick up something new. I'll tell you one thing I always enjoy doing is watching somebody else code, because it may be like a shortcut they use or a tool they use, and it may not be about the code that I've probably seen 100 times. That's why I really enjoy seeing what others are using. Also, I like seeing others fail. It makes me feel good that I'm not the only one that can't code 1,000 lines an hour. I too, like everybody else, fumble around a lot, Google a lot. Thanks for the suggestion there, Greg. Dropping that background music down a lot. We're not going to keep this on the whole time. Again, it's just one of those things I'm playing with. Let's try this. Andres, how are you? I'm doing good. How are you? How's everybody doing on a Friday? Go ahead and let me know in the chat where you guys are from. Just kind of setting a few things up here. See if we can get some audio from here so the mic's out of my way. All right. Actually, didn't know that, Greg. Tennessee, huh? Good to know. I don't want to mess your name up, so I'm not going to try and pronounce that. Gorgie, I guess. I hope I got that kind of right. Sorry if I didn't. Hi, how are you doing? I'm doing great. How are you doing on a Friday? Hopefully good. All right, I think everything is good. Let me take this off of here. Get rid of our background noise. Oh, wow. Nigeria, Germany, Turkey. That's pretty cool. Glad to see so many places represented right now. Can't tell. Oh, okay, so there's my count. We have almost, what, 15 people in here? Awesome. All right, so like I said, what we're going to do today is a couple things. One, I just really want to get back to live streaming. I did it a few times before, but never kind of really stuck to it. So I think this is just me trying to make sure I understand my software, making sure video and audio are good to go, and then I can get back to doing more live streams. So I think what we're going to do with a lot of these live streams too is a couple things. One, I produce content for a blog or for YouTube or for courses. So I may start to show you behind the scenes of that. So if I'm gonna create a tutorial for YouTube on, let me just bring this up. Let me pop over to me and my screen. So this is not what we're going to do today, but I'm just trying to use an example. But one thing I saw on the blog over here on Spring was introducing Spring GraphQL. So I started to play with this. So I want to put a tutorial together for this. And it takes time to figure out exactly what you want to do in a tutorial. Are you going to have any slides? What are you going to say as an intro to what you're going to build? And then, the code that you need to go ahead and demo during that tutorial, that needs to be built. So I think I want to start putting a lot of that together in the live stream. So for instance, next week, I'm going to try and put this type of tutorial together, and we'll go through and we'll build the actual code that we're going to use in the demo. So you'll be able to see me real time fumbling with it and trying to figure things out. So I think this is a really cool project. It's still in a snapshot version. It's not in a milestone yet, but they're doing some cool things with GraphQL, and I'm glad to see this in the Spring ecosystem. So maybe we'll take a look at that next week. So those are the kind of things that I'm thinking of doing, but as people start to show up to these live streams, I will definitely take suggestions. So whatever you want to see me do, please feel free to let me know. I'm going to come up with a much better way of trying to capture some of these. So one thing that I was thinking of is over here on GitHub, I have these, you can do these discussions. And what I was thinking of doing is using these discussions as like a place where we could all kind of jot down some ideas. So if you'd like to see some courses from me on a particular topic, we can add these here. If you want to see a specific tutorial on YouTube, you can add that here. Maybe I'll add another one for just like live streaming in general. And if you want to say something nice, you can do that here. So I think discussions is a really good place to do this. GitHub's got a nice GraphQL API that you can use. So I may be able to pull that in over on my website and add like a place where people can kind of go ahead and suggest different things. So again, all things I'm going to play with on the live stream, just around creating content and then around, learning something new. So what we're going to learn today is really just some basics on creating a REST API in Spring Boot. So please go ahead and ask questions as we go if you have any questions. The reason I chose this topic is I found that even though a lot of people may know the semantics of creating an API in Spring Boot, Spring makes it really, really easy to do. One thing that I see a lot of is not well-constructed REST APIs, and we'll talk more about that as we get into a demo here. But figured I'd just walk you through my process, and again, if you've seen a REST API, you're maybe not going to get a lot out of that today, but you may pick up something, a tool that I use or something keyboard shortcut, that kind of thing. So we'll get into it. Please feel free to go ahead and ask questions. And I think with that, I'm going to get this out of the way and we'll go over to Intellij. So I'm using Intellij Idea, the Ultimate Edition. Definitely one of my favorite IDEs ever. But I always like to preface this with, you do not need the Ultimate Edition. I know it costs money. I know not everybody can afford it. And that's, I get that. So there are different ways to start a Spring project. You can go to start.spring.io. So we can go ahead and go here. And in fact, when we go ahead and create that project within Intellij, it is basically using the Spring Initializer in here anyway. So you can create a project here. The one thing I really like about this is you can, as you're like picking dependencies, if you were going to go ahead and grab a web, you can click this explore and see what the project is going to generate. So I think that's a really cool feature. Here's the demo application that it generates. You could even copy some things from here if you wanted to. But I'm going to use the IDE. Again, you can use anything else, Eclipse, Visual Studio Code, whatever you wanted. Let me just go ahead and pull some of these up. So I had a question here. What is better practice to implement DTOs? I guess I don't fully understand the question. So data transfer objects are really when you have like a model and you may not need the entire model. The common example is, hey, I have this whole entire user class or user model within my application, but when I sign up, I just need an email address and a password. And that's really where like a data transfer object comes into play. It's kind of a representation of a user, but a slimmed down model, if you will. So if you want to try and ask a more specific question, you can, and I'll try and answer that as we go. Or always, let me bring that back up. Feel free to head over to danvega.dev. You can find my contact info there at the bottom. Go ahead and hit me up on Twitter. All my links are down here as well. So always feel free to go ahead and ask a question there. Okay, so we're going to start with new project. And so again, if you're familiar with this, I'm sorry if this is kind of beginnerish. If you're not familiar with it, this is a new project wizard within Intellij. You have a whole, so again, in the ultimate version, you have a whole bunch of different of items you can select in here. So if you wanted to create a Quarkus application, Micronaut, microprofile, whole bunch of options. I'm going to choose the Spring Initializer, which is ultimately using start.spring.io. You can change that if you wanted to configure, say, a company starter. You could fork the start.spring.io starter and create your own. But we're going to leave this at that. So let's say we're creating a REST demo. So this is the name of the project, the location. We're going to use Maven, Java. Here's our package name. I'm going to actually use Java 16, and we're going to pick jar. So I'm just reading through some. Maybe he means using builder pattern to convert from model to DTO, or using something like model mapper. Yeah, that's definitely. I was referring to the development using mapstruct or JSON annotations to implement in a better way. Okay. Yeah, let me think about that, and maybe I can come up with a tutorial for that as well. Do you have any plans to make microservices with Spring tutorials? The answer is yes. So a lot of what I'm doing right now in my day job. So if you don't know, I work for a consulting company called Breebug, and we are working with a lot of, well, the one company I'm working with now is one very large enterprise using Spring Cloud, Spring Microservices, a whole bunch of, that whole stack. So doing a lot of things with Spring Microservices. So I'd definitely be interested in putting some content together like that, because that is, it's a mind shift. You have to, when you're moving from monolith to microservices, there are definitely some things you need to be aware of and consider. And also the bigger picture is you also need to understand, should you move to a microservice? Because just because everybody's throwing that buzzword around today doesn't mean you should be automatically breaking down your monolithic application into a microservice. So I definitely love to add some content around that as well. So this is my favorite part. This is where we get to pick all the dependencies in our project. And I liken this to, what you're going to eat for dinner tonight. Let's say we were going to have, say, one of my favorite meals, some steak, some mashed potatoes, some green beans. These are all the things that, your meal is going to consist of. So if we're going to the grocery store, what are the ingredients that we need to pick up for that, right? It's not just like steak, but we need some seasonings. We need some potatoes. We need some green beans. What are we going to have to drink with that? These are all, things that go into a meal are all the ingredients that we need to go ahead and make that meal. So this is kind of the same. What are we going to build today? What are the ingredients that we need to go ahead and build that application? Now, fortunately for us, we're going to build something pretty simple today. But, this could get complex later. So I do want to show, I'm not sure how far we're going to get, but I think what I want to do now is just start with web. So we're going to build a web including RESTful applications using Spring MVC. It uses Apache Tomcat as the default embedded container. So I'm going to go ahead and choose Spring Web. And we'll let that go ahead and create. Let's just full screen that for now. All right. So the first thing that I really love about the Spring Initializer is based on those dependencies that you selected. The documentation is going to include the main README file is going to, or the help file is going to include relevant information, relevant links to things that you may be working on. So for instance, we picked the web starter or web dependency, which brings in the web MVC starter. So it's going to have guides here. Hey, do you want to build a RESTful web service? Go ahead and check this guide out. And shout out to Greg, if you're still here, who's done a lot of work on those Spring guides, which are really great. So you can find those over at spring.io and check out the guide section. There's a lot of really good, short guides on how to do something. So I like this documentation. So I'm going to pull up the pom.xml. And the first thing I want to look at is just, as we pick those dependencies, those are going to create dependencies here because I chose Maven, in our pom.xml. And what I want to look at here is in IntelliJ, you get some really, IntelliJ does so much. I've been using it for a while now, and I feel like I learn something every day. And so, you really have to, like, if you want to get really good at using an IDE, try to take the time to learn the IDE, pick up something new every week, because there are so many things that I can do to really help you develop and help you understand kind of things that you're building. So first off, in the POM, we have these gutter icons here, right? And this is basically saying, okay, there's a dependency here. You notice we don't have a version here, but if you hover over this, you can see that we are using 2.5.2. That was declared up here. But we can also click through to where this is being actually declared. So we have this Spring Boot Starter Web 2.5.2, and this is in the Spring Boot dependencies. And if you always want to figure out kind of what versions are being set for different projects, you can always come up here and start to search through here and look at all the different versions for each of the dependencies that you brought into your project. So that's one thing. So we have Spring Boot Starter Web. And again, if we wanted to add different dependencies, we could. We can come in here and say if we wanted to add like H2, we can add an H2 database. I'm not going to right this second, but I saw something the other day too with IntelliJ 2021.2 or .1.2 or whatever version it was. The next version has a dependency manager where it brings up this little window from the bottom, and you can actually search for a dependency, locate it over on Maven somewhere, and pull it right into your project, which I thought was really cool. And it works with both Maven and Gradle, which was awesome. So cool things coming in the next version of IntelliJ. I can't, I am a paying member of IntelliJ. I am not being paid to promote them. I just think the IDE is really great and does so many things for us. So let's close out of there, and we'll see what the application has, or what the initializer built for us, which is just this main application class. So this is a REST API demo application. It has a main method, and this is going to kick off our Spring application. So right away, we could run it from here. We can run it from here. We also have this little gutter icon that allows us to look at some Spring diagrams, although I don't find these particularly useful, especially right now. There's not much going on. So another thing we're going to look at is the Spring Boot application. So you can kind of click through into each of these annotations, or into, say, a method by holding Command on the Mac. And you can see these shortcuts down here. So if you want to find the equivalent one on, say, Windows, you can. So the big thing to note about the application class is that it has a bunch of other annotations on it. So it has things like Spring Boot configuration, which is a configuration class. So we know that we could declare beans in this main class if we wanted. It has our enable auto configuration annotation on its component scan. So basically anything within this package, it will be able to find. If it's not within that package, then you need to tell it about it. And then there's some other things going on that I don't want to get into. That's all to say that I know we can come in here and start to do things. I like to kind of separate my classes out into their own class. So let's start there. So the idea is we want to create a REST API. This is going to be a way for other applications to call to this application and pull back some data. So let's just say that we're building a basic CRUD application. We may not even get through all the CRUD stuff today. But what I want to start with is, we'll just start with something simple. And actually I was going to do like a user, but let's try something else. Let me grab All right. Yeah, just so we can stay consistent here. So let's say that we're working on a book application. So I did some work for O'Reilly. If you have a chance to check that out, if you're a O'Reilly member, learning.o'reilly.com. By the way, I am a paying member of this as well, not under there, but under here. Fantastic resource for just so many great things. I did some work here. If you just search for me, so a couple of my courses are up here, but I also did a bunch of these challenges. And these challenges are things that you can kind of use to just kind of test yourself on particular things in Spring. So you can check those out. I'm just mentioning that because I'm going to use the same kind of model, which is books. Ooh, I got a question here. Let me go ahead and pop this over. Let me move this out of the way a little. Could you point out what to consider in terms of security, building a REST API with Spring, or do I even have to think about that? Does the framework already cover those things? Any recommendation? So the framework does not cover those things by default, but you have integration with something called Spring Security, which will really help you kind of lock those REST APIs down quickly. Now, it really depends on the mechanism that you want to control locking those APIs down. But you mentioned building a REST API with Spring. My recommendation is always, build the API out first. You can secure it later, because you're gonna fiddle with a lot of things when it comes to security and roles and if it's a REST API with tokens. So make sure you have the API contract locked down first and then come back to security. But that's a really good question. Maybe in our next live coding session, what we'll do is we'll take the API that we've done today and maybe try and lock that down. I think that would be interesting, that a lot of folks would like to see. So I'll take that under consideration. So thank you for that question. Okay, so as I said, what we're going to work with today is a book. So I like to kind of separate my classes out into packages. This is not a requirement, but for me, it's really kind of self-documenting for other developers who come pull this project later. Nobody wants to see this large folder full of, 40 classes. So I'm basically saying to the next person who comes, hey, anything you find in this package, they're basically going to be models for our application. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new Java class. We'll call this book. And inside of book, let's go ahead and create a few things. We'll say an int ID, title, an author, and maybe a publisher. We could do more, but I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to create getters and setters. So again, being able to do this right in the IDE, this generate everything really helps out. A lot of people, even at work, I've gotten this a lot. People always ask me, why don't I just use Lombok in these situations? So two things. One, I don't know about you guys, but I found that not everybody's always on the same tool, even in the same organization. So Lombok has a annotation processor that needs to be configured in the IDE or things don't work right. I found a lot of people kind of fidget with that and have problems, and then you got to kind of make sure you tell someone who's coming in on that project about that if they're not familiar with it. And for me, the argument is always, well, I don't want to write getters and setters. Well, you don't write them. You are generating them. And you see how long it took me to generate those. And so I like having that code there already. Now, another thing that we could look at in the future is, now that we're on Java 16 here, you can use records. So if you haven't had a chance to check out records, records are really cool. So we can do this, and we can say integer age. So this is basically taking the place of this with these instance variables, all these getters and setters. So you can do some really cool thing with records, which I'm not going to do today, but I do have a demo or a tutorial coming on that. Hi, can you do front-end view afterwards? I've been looking everywhere for a view plus Spring Boot, but there is none. Yes, absolutely. Thanks for that question. I do want to show you something though. So again, even I can't remember how to get to my YouTube channel, so this is the easiest place. But if you head over to my YouTube channel, or even, did I even post it on here? Yeah, so there's a link here. So full stack Java using Spring Boot and Vue.js. So there's a link to the YouTube video on that. And basically I broke it down on how to go ahead and create that project, how I would set it up. Have a single project with the Vue application inside of the source main resources static folder. So this article goes over that, and there's a video associated with that. So if you feel like you go through that and you still need more, please just reach out to me and let me know what you're looking for. And again, I think that's the kind of purpose of this right now is, you know, getting some feedback from you guys and seeing what you want to see and seeing what you want to build. So, what's up, friends? Dan. So let's go back here. By the way, I got to get back to writing. I put so much effort into this website, and I love this website, and I don't use it enough. So if you want to show some love, head over to the website, read a couple articles, and let me know that I need to write some more. Okay, so back to our book. So now we have a book object, and this is really what we are modeling our application after. We have this book, and we want to have, oh, I got to take a second to highlight this one. Thank you, Greg. Appreciate it. I did put some time into it, and I'm really proud of that. So mainly because, you know, I've been a back-end developer forever who really admires front-end development, and just, you know, the skill that it takes to kind of put those kind of front ends together. And so for me to be able to put something like this together was a lot of fun. So hope to do more of that kind of work in the future too. Okay, back to our program. So we have this book model, and maybe in our REST API, so we're standing up an application so that maybe a Vue.js front end, which is one of my favorite frameworks, maybe a front end that is using Vue.js or React or Angular, whatever you're using, doesn't matter to me. You know, they're all a means to the end. They're all here for a purpose. And I always tell everybody, you know, we're here to write code. Whatever you like to write in does not bother me at all. So we're writing maybe a front end client, maybe we have a mobile client, and we want to display a list of books in our front-end application, or a list of courses, or a list of whatever. So we're starting with books here. So we have this model. We're saying we have an ID, we have a title, we have an author, and we have a publisher. So the next thing I want to do is I want to stand up some type of service so that those clients can go out and get a list of books, maybe get information for just one single book. Maybe if we have an admin app somewhere that they can go ahead and create new books or delete books. That's really what our API is for. And so what I want to do is I'm going to create another package in here called controller. And inside controller, I'm going to create a book controller. Now this is not required in Spring. You do not need to end the class name in controller, but it is done by convention. Again, just so you can quickly find those and understand what that class is there for. So I have a class. I'm going to go ahead and annotate it with this REST controller annotation. And this is really, so this is another, this is actually an interview question I ask a lot of people. You know, I start off with some easier interview questions, especially when it comes to Spring. What does a REST controller annotation do? And for me, all I'm looking for from that question is it really is telling our class that this is going to be a class that accepts HTTP requests and responds to them. So that's what this class's purpose is to do. It's going to map some methods to some HTTP requests on specific methods and then know how to respond to it. This class is not meant to handle business logic. It doesn't do a whole bunch of things. You know, a controller in any language should be pretty dumb. There shouldn't be a lot of logic here. That should be somewhere else. So that's the main purpose of a REST controller. Now, what I want to get out of this too, though, is how we go about building this controller and what, you know, what this is going to respond to. And I'll tell you more about that in a second. So one of the mistakes that I've seen a lot, even on some recent projects, is that we'll come in here and start creating some endpoints, right? Like get all books or get book or create me a new book. And while there is nothing wrong with this, we could come in here and create a method that is going to return a list of book. We'll talk about finishing that in a second. So there's nothing wrong with this, but I don't find this to be very clean and very restful. So what I mean by that is that I should have a single endpoint for this controller as to which all operations will respond to based on the request method. So what I mean by that is this get mapping is tied to this / get all books. And this one is to get book. And this one, you know, there's a lot of endpoints that then we, you know, if somebody's trying to use our API, they have to figure out, right? And so for me, when I talk about a RESTful API, all of these methods in here should fall under the same base endpoint. And so for this one, you know, we're going to go ahead and use a request mapping /API /books. So now what I'm saying is that any method that I'm going to expose as an endpoint to the outside world is going to start with /API /books. One advantage to this is it really makes it cleaner for the consumer who's consuming your API. We talked about security earlier. This becomes a lot easier to secure because I can say, hey, everything under API /books is now going to be secured a particular way. And so this is, for me, the beginning point to creating a REST API. Everything should really fall under API /books. Now, the request method is going to tell us what we're going to do. So if we're just have a get mapping, then maybe we're getting all the books. If we have a get mapping with a particular ID, we know we need to get a specific book. And we can always have, you know, some type of method down here that falls under something else, like filter by. You know, I'm fine with that, but I think everything really needs to fall under that /API/books. Okay, I got a question here. So sorry for off topic, and this is not off topic at all. That's a great question. What is the main difference you see between controller and at-rest controller? So the main difference is that if you, well, I don't even need to do that. If you go into REST controller, you'll see that, you know, one of the big things you'll see in Spring a lot of is annotations composed of other annotations. And so the REST controller annotation is nothing special. It's actually a controller annotation that's also annotated with @response body. So if you look at @response body, all this is saying is that this annotation indicates a method return value should be bound to the web response body. And so all controllers are basically going to return to you a view. A REST controller is going to return to you whatever that response body is looking for. In our case, the default is going to be application/JSON, but you can obviously customize that if you want to use, say, XML. So that's really the biggest difference. You're going to use controller if you are using views like a time leaf or FreeMarker or Groovy templates. If you're using those views, then you're going to use a controller and return a view that's, say, inside the resources static or templates directory. REST controller is, hey, I'm exposing this and I'm not returning a template. I'm returning some actual data. And again, by default, that is a data type of application/JSON. But wouldn't that sometimes consume and upload data that we won't need? I'm not sure about your question there. If you could rephrase that, I'll try and answer that. So good practice is to have one endpoint for a REST controller. No, I'm not saying that. Not one endpoint, but one base, yes. Like, I don't want to see, that's why I like setting this at the class level. And actually, nobody told me, but I think I need to bump up my font. Sorry about that. That's why I like setting this request mapping at the controller level, because if you don't do it there, then you could go ahead and say /API/publishers here and you know, some other, you know, prefix here. So yes, I like having one kind of root endpoint for everything in this controller. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're just going to use get mapping, so we don't actually need to add anything else to this. This is just saying, hey, if you're going to start me up and visit HTTP localhost 8080/API/books. So that's that. You will see some do this, even I do this once in a while, but pretty much the same thing. So now we need to get some books in here. So what I want to do is we'll kind of build this as we go, but at first I'm just going to create a, let's create a private final list of user. Where are these coming from? Why did I say user? I was thinking we were going to build a users demo for some reason, but yeah. So let's go ahead and add those in here. And actually, I'm not going to do any dependency injection yet. So let's just start off with this. Ooh, I had some data in here that Greg might like from, let's see. Oh yeah, here we go. So there's a title. So now what we need is, I do want a constructor where I can say all of that. And then I'm going to go ahead and say one. And what did we do? Title. Okay. And then so there's our single book. So we'll move this into a service at some point, obviously, but I don't like to overcomplicate things until we need to. So there's our one book. Now what I can do is just go ahead and return that. So let's say return books. So now if we were to start the application and visit localhost 8080/API/books, we should get that single book back. So let's go ahead and do that, but I'm not going to go into a browser. I want to show you something else in IntelliJ that I really like. Thank you, Greg. I'll have to put in a coupon code here in our model. Okay, so our application is running. So at this point, you could go over to the browser, open up a browser, visit that URL, and you would see, what you were expecting to see. But something else I like in IntelliJ here is we can open this up in an HTTP client. The other thing we can do is right here, just go ahead and say, where are we at here? Oh, so this one got all of them. That was from before. So here's our HTTP client. So it basically opened this up in this generated request.http, but it knew the exact URL that we are working with. So http localhost 8080/API/books. And if you're new to Spring Boot and not sure where I'm getting 8080, you can see down here Tomcat started on port 8080. And that is the default port, and that can always be changed. So if you wanted to change that to something else, you could, but that's the default port that Spring Boot is starting on. So all this to say that now I don't need to leave the IDE to go to a browser and test this endpoint. I can do it right here in IntelliJ. So this ran the request, you can see the headers here. So the content type is application JSON, transfer, date, keep alive. Here is the result. This is an array of books, and the books, there's that single book that we added there. So now if we go back to here, and let's maybe put this back on one line. Let's have another book here. We'll call this another one of my favorite books. By Mark Heckler. And this is O'Reilly Media Inc. There's another book. So now I have two books in there. We don't have Spring Boot DevTools on, so it didn't restart. We're going to go ahead and restart that manually. Thanks, Greg. Thanks for joining. Ted, nice to see you, my friend. Never love IntelliJ's internal HTTP client. Never leaving IntelliJ Idea is a goal in my life. That's very true. I mean, anything that you can do to keep yourself inside of the IDE is definitely going to help you be more productive. And yeah, I mean, especially in this point, we're just testing endpoints. No reason to kick up a browser, or in our case, you know, browsers don't always work, because if you want to test a post endpoint or a put or delete, you got to fire up something like Postman, or one of my favorite tools is Insomnia for doing similar things. But why would I want to fire up a tool when I can do everything right here in the IDE? So I restarted. We should have a couple books now. So if we go back over to our generated requests, let's go ahead and run this again. And now that you'll see, we get an array with 2 books in there. So now we're going to go ahead and write another endpoint. Let's say that we want to write a Git mapping, and we want to say we're going to provide an ID as part of the path in the URL. And that is how we are going to find a particular book. So right now we're just using ID, integers for our books. And this is how we're going to be able to pick out one of those books. Something else I'm kind of a stickler on is naming. I just stick to a convention, but that's not a big deal. So I may return, I just want to find a single book here. Now, when you get into kind of, well, what if we don't find a book? This is where optionals come in really great. I tend to follow what I'm using. So what I mean by that is if I'm using a Spring Data, I know that a find by ID in Spring Data is going to return to me an optional of a book. So that's probably going to be my, that'd be my return type in my service, but not here. Again, most of the time we can probably, the next evolution of this is what are we going to return from the controller? And it depends. Like if you need to add extra headers and data on there, mainly you're using it to add extra like headers or control the response. You can return, say, a response entity with a book inside of it. But let's keep it simple for now. So I'm going to return a book. I'm going to say find by ID. And now what we are doing here is we want to, again, the path is going to look like /API/books/1. And that 1 is part of the path. And the way that we pick that out of the path, that number 1, that number 2, is by using this annotation called the path variable. And so I know when I started with Spring, some of these were a little confusing to me. I was like, wait, there's path variable, there's request parameter, there's this, there's that. And I guess what you should try and do is just trying to understand what you're trying to do here. And what we're trying to do here is we are providing a path so that somebody can call this URL. And what we need to do now is get that variable out of the path. So all we're saying here is that that is going to be an integer. We're going to call that ID. And that is what we're going to get as now an argument to this method. So now what we can do is we can say, all right, I want you to go ahead and find me that particular book. Now, we probably should have made this a map. It would have been a lot easier. But what we can do is we can take our books, we can turn it into a stream. We can say book.get ID is equal to ID. Find first, and that should give us our book back. Nope, doesn't like that. So, oh, nope. So this is where we can do this with a filter, but again, I would probably have a map entry here so that the key was the ID and the value was the actual book itself. But we should be able to say, give me a stream, filter it by book.getID is equal to ID so that's returning an optional. I forgot, sorry. So now that should return to us a book, and there you go. So now, again, in a real-world application, we're not dealing with this. We're probably dealing with a service class that is talking to a repository, or even directly talking to our repository here. And that service class is kind of controlling what's coming back. So we're just saying, hey, go to the database, get me a book from the database where the ID is 1. So with that saved, let's go ahead and rerun this. And again, I don't have to leave the comfort of the IDE. I can just say that I want to go ahead. And the really great thing is here is, again, it's kind of filled this in for me, right? Like it's saying, all right, here's localhost 80 API books, and then just go ahead and supply a ID. So I'm going to go ahead and click run. And it's going to find the first book. And if I hit 2 and run that, it's going to go ahead and find book number 2. Something else I want to kind of just make sure everyone knows about, because I'm not sure how much farther we're going to get today. That sometimes when you're constructing maybe a post request or a put request, there are more things involved, right? And maybe you don't want to type those out. You can come in here and you can add a request, and there are some defaults here, or some examples that will help you out. So let's say I want to post with a text body. So here it's basically saying, here's an example of how you could do that. This is the actual body of what you are posting. So if you wanted to say, like, I'm posting an ID of 1 and a name of Dan, right? This is your JSON that you're posting. It's application/JSON, and then we would go to API/books. So I'll actually probably save that one because we're going to get to that. So you can see the way that these are kind of separated are by these 3 hashtags here. And that separates each one of these HTTP calls. Is it better to validate a request body in the controller, or would you do it in the service? So again, you'll hear me say this a lot, but it depends, right? Like it depends what level of validation you're trying to do. So let's just talk about this real quick. So let's say we have, let's not return anything, and we want to create a new book, right? And what we're going to do is accept a book here. So sure, you could take this book, send it off to a service and validate. That's one approach, and it really depends on the level of validation you're doing. But if it's just at the model level, if it's just trying to ensure that the data that you're getting is correct, there's a good way to do this. So this used to be included in the Spring Boot Starter web dependency, but it's been kind of split out on its own. But there is a validation starter. I don't know why it doesn't autocomplete that way. Spring Boot Starter validation. That comes from Spring, and this brings in some validation for you that you can go ahead and control some validation on your model just using annotations. So the way that we do this is we start over here in book, and let's say that a title of a book can never be blank. We don't want someone to be able to create a book without a title. So what we can come in here and do is we have a bunch of annotations. Oh, I didn't actually. So anytime you change the POM, you need to make sure you reload Maven so we get that dependency in here. So we get these javax.validation.constraints. And so what I would do is come in here and say, all right, I don't want this to be empty. And this is one saying, hey, we need something actually in this value. So the annotated element must not be null or empty. So you can't just pass in a blank string. So now, if we come into our controller, the only other thing we have to do here is we have to add an @valid annotation. And what this will say is it marks this property, the method parameter, or the return type for validation cascading. Cascading is important because if you had something like address in here or whatever, and address is not a good example of a book, but you get my drift. You can cascade those validations down. Just for this one, we have a title. And now what we can do is before we get, so let me just write this. Before we even get here, we're going to let Spring tell us if that book's been validated or not. And what this does, it allows us to not get into any of our logic yet. Again, our controllers should be pretty dumb. They're not doing a lot. And this will throw a 400 bad request if those validations are not met. So let's go ahead and try this. So here's the post. We want content type to be application/JSON, accept application/JSON. So let's try and send a book in. So we'll send a book in of 3, a title of blank, an author of Dan, and a publisher of Amazon. Whoops. Okay, so here's our object. Let's go ahead and try and send this request. So we need to probably restart. Where are my... There we go. Let me try this again. So as you can see, now we get a 400 bad requests back. And again, we're not even getting into the REST controller. Spring is validating this for us. Now, again, this is just when we're trying to validate basic properties of what our book looks like. We're ensuring that whatever book comes into us is a valid one. If for whatever reason we had a bunch of business logic that needed to do a lot more complex validation, we could write custom validators, or I've even done a second level of validation kind of in a service level or a custom validator to do that. So I hope that answers your question. So I think what we're going to do is I'll just kind of close this out with, we have a get mapping to get all of our books. We have a get mapping to get a single book. We have a post mapping to create a book. We could have a put mapping to /ID public void update. Again, you would take a valid book here to update an existing book, and a delete mapping to delete. So this would take again a path variable, integer ID, and then you can delete by ID. So this is really what a REST controller looks like for me. I like, again, we're falling under the root request mapping of /API/books. And then the only thing that is distinguishing each of these methods under here now is the request method, whether it's a get or a post or a put or a delete. And then we can always have more endpoints here that kind of fall under that. You could have a find book by author, etc. But I guess the point of this was just, hey, let's make sure that we organize all of our endpoints that belong to the book controller underneath that one /API/books. Because again, that's something I see a lot of, is just mixing and matching all of these different endpoints in a single controller. And then if you do this for every controller, it just becomes more consistent throughout your application. It makes it, much easier to understand what, as a consumer, what you're going to be getting out of that API. Is it just saying bad request, but it doesn't say the reason for the bad request? Yeah, so you can always come in here and give it a reason. So please make sure you enter a title for a book, or whatever. So you can customize those messages. All right. Oh, I didn't get that in. Where did that go? All right, so I think that's where we're going to end today. Again, I know not a lot of terribly exciting things today, but we can use this. We can build on it. Maybe we'll start to build on this a little bit more next time. and actually fill out those methods. We can kind of create and update and delete work, but we'd probably put this into, say, a service class. So we can move that into a service class, talk about dependency injection. Ultimately, we can move that into a database. So we can start to talk about JDBC or even Spring Data. So we'll just kind of see where this goes. Somebody mentioned security earlier. I'd definitely like to talk about, once we get this built out, how can we secure this? So I don't know if we'll just continue with books, but maybe I'll come up with a more real world application we can start to build out. So again, if you want to find out more information about me, head over to danvega.dev. Please feel free to contact me. Tell me if you want to learn anything specific on these live streams or in a tutorial or even a course. I'm going to try and stick to this and get a lot more of these live streams out, get to more tutorials on YouTube, because I just really enjoy doing this stuff. So is there a way you can generalize these boilerplate methods, perhaps with generics? Yeah, you could. So another thing you can do if you really want to get down to, let's go to Spring Boot. So there is Spring Data REST. There are ways to do this in, and I just don't do it in Spring a lot, but there's a way to say, like, here's my model. I think this Spring Data REST. You could just say, hey, here's the resource. Here's what I'm trying to generate an API for, and it will generate that API for you. If it's strictly like boilerplate stuff, like you're just working with CRUD operations, there are ways to do that. I don't know why I can't remember what project that is, but there is a way to get rid of a lot of that boilerplate and just have Spring generate those API endpoints for you. Will you commit this code to GitHub? So head over to GitHub. You'll find some of this code already there. Let's see. Yeah, actually, I don't have this specific one. So yeah, I will commit this. I'll get this up there. Maybe I'll just stick it in branches and put a title on it for, whatever day we're doing a live stream. Thank you for your courses on Udemy. They're some of the best available. Wow, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Again, something I want to get back to. I have 2 little kids at home who need me right now. So those are, as they get a little older, that's something I definitely want to get back to, is creating more courses. I enjoy doing this stuff. So thank you. I appreciate that. All right. With that, I'm going to leave you guys. Happy Friday. Hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you for spending a little bit of your time on Friday with me. I appreciate it. And I will see you in the next live stream. Take care, everyone.